morning, ladies and gentlemen. Everyone caffeinated and ready to go? Super. So I'm going to start my talk with a quote. Those who fail to learn from history are condemned to repeat it. How many of you have heard this before? How many of you believe that there's some merit to this? Great, because we're going to start with understanding the history for e-commerce in the retail environment and use that as a parable for finance. 2 decades ago, have you guys heard of companies called Walmart and Sears? The two largest retailers in the world, about $30 billion companies, both very similar, 4,000 stores, aiming to win the traditional way by providing the widest selection of retail at the lowest prices and creating customer delight. Then 2 decades ago came Amazon, and with it e-commerce, and with it a choice to be made. They're both scratching their heads thinking about, should we embrace the traditional way of doing things, or should we invest in this new thing? Walmart and Sears, they diverged in their reaction to digital. Walmart continued to maintain their brick and mortar stores, but they invested quite heavily in e-commerce. They invested not just in building a website where people could order goods, they invested in automating the back-end logistics, warehousing, all of the functions that matter to the critical ROI metrics. Sears, on the other hand, thought that they're going to stay with their ethos. They continued to invest in brick and mortar, minimum investment in e-commerce. I think halfway through the 2-decade mark, they decided, well, there's something to this. We need to invest in e-commerce. So they built a website. But most of their investment was still geared towards the front-facing website. They put up a website where people could order things, but they did nothing to automate the back-end process that allowed people to automate logistics and warehousing. 2 decades later, the results are there for all to see. So in 2018, Walmart's online sales grew 40%, while their overall sales grew about 3%. At the same time, Sears was filing for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. Now, how many of you feel that a similar kind of retail wars, as they were called, is about to play out in finance? A lot of lenders believe this. A lot of lenders are starting to hear this message. So in 2018, JP Morgan announced that they would invest $10 billion out of their annual budget on fintech. But if you scratch underneath that surface, I think you see a very similar problem. Most of these investments are again on front-facing websites. If you read their articles, they talk about customer experience, digital robots, on-demand human touch. Now, these are all things that impact the front-end consumer experience, and they're very visible, and we understand why people want to invest in them. But they do nothing to impact the critical ROI metrics, like turnaround time for loans, like cost of processing each loan, like scalability. So in other words, you can have a really nice website with great customer experience, but does that really matter if you can't turn around a loan in 1 hour, if it still takes 3 days to turn around a loan? Does that matter if you can't process 1,000 loans every hour? Does that matter if your cost of processing each loan is so high that only people with the largest loans can actually apply to you? Now, fintechs, on the other hand, they started 2 decades ago with a similar thing. They started with the belief that people would prefer to borrow online. They went out to banks, they tried to partner with them, but for the most part, they were turned away by banks. Banks said, hey, this is too regulated an industry, this is not there for this Mickey Mouse online stuff, we need to do this the traditional way. So they were forced, now note they were forced, this was not a choice that they made, to go out and cater to customers who traditional banks either rejected or ignored. So they went to customers with dodgy credit scores, they went to customers who wanted money now in the next hour, not in the next 4 days. They went to customers who wanted loans so small, $200 loans, where a bank's processing cost for a loan would exceed the size of the loan itself. And to serve those customers, they were forced essentially to reimagine the entire underwriting process. They had to digitize the whole thing. They couldn't rely on just the credit history. They had to get bank transactions and develop cash flow models to give out these loans. They had to develop fraud analytics because their entire existence depended on not too many loans going bankrupt. So in the process, they've created an entirely automated system, which is not just more inclusive of customers, but also faster. They can make decisions in minutes instead of days. More scalable. They can process thousands and thousands of loan decisions every second as opposed to a few hundred every day, which most typical banks do. And very low cost. So they can process a loan for a few dollars instead of a few $100 what it takes a typical bank to do. So the point is that the technology gap that's likely to emerge between traditional banks and lenders and new age fintechs is not likely to be in the front-end user experience. Banks will have websites where you can apply for loans, and fintechs will have websites where you can apply for loans. It's likely to be in the back-end processing. After you apply for the loan, can you get a loan in a few minutes instead of a few days? Can you process thousands of loans every hour instead of a few hundred loans a day? Can you do it at a few dollars instead of a few $100s? So I'm going to go with a quote. How many of you have Gartner? Gartner is a very famous research company, very reputable. So they made a statement that by 2030, that's not too far from now, it's about 10 years away, 80%, 8 out of every 10 financial institutions will either go out of business or be rendered irrelevant by technology. That's a pretty bold statement to be made by a very reputable research house. 2 decades ago, Sears made a choice between business as usual and transformation. You can all read how that turned out in their bankruptcy filing. And now it's time for you to make a choice for your business. What choice will you make? So for those of you in traditional banks and finance here, the bad news is over. We're going to go now to the second part of the presentation, which leads out how you can take this and automate your credit decisioning. Any questions before we dive into the second part? We good? Okay. Let's go through a typical underwriting process in a bank today. It's typically either in-house credit managers or it's outsourced to a BPO. But what are they doing? It's typically they get credit reports from the credit bureaus, they get bank statements, but what do they do with the bank statements? They don't actually transcribe them. They'll look for specific things such as regular incoming salaries and income, regular expenses such as rent and EMIs, and they'll jot those down and they'll do a quick analysis. It takes them a lot of time and it's fairly basic. What we're looking to do when we get automated in our credit analysis is to try and have this entire process be done by a computer, by an AI algorithm. But to do that, the first thing we have to do is we have to extract data from scanned bank statement images and convert that into a database format before we can run AI algorithms. How do we do that? So this is, so my company does exactly that. And the inspiration for this is Google's CAPTCHA. So about a decade ago, Google decided that they were going to digitize all of the old books that existed. All the history books, any book ever written was going to be digitized. And they employed an OCR technology that they developed called Tesseract to do it. The problem with Tesseract and with most OCR tools that banks use is that they're fairly inaccurate. They get to about 65 or 70% accuracy. So what Google did was they found specific words that were inaccurate within the text, and they converted it into something called a CAPTCHA. So have you guys ever been to a website and been asked to prove that you're not a robot and you're a human being? I'm sure all of you guys have. So you've inadvertently done what they call a data verification task for Google. So these are specifically words that the OCR algorithm is not able to transcribe automatically. It needs a human to do it. We employ a very similar technology at Ocrolus to get to the same results. So we get scanned bank statements, we run OCR on it, and the parts that are not transcribable go to a human verification force, where they're transcribed and that data is then fed back into the AI algorithm, so that similar kind of mistakes that lead the algorithm to not be able to perform properly are not repeated. So the next time the AI is able to do it themselves. So our process is a blend of machine and human. You can see the colors are not very clear on the screen, but the dark blue stuff is machine, the light blue green stuff is human. So the first part is pattern recognition and OCR. Once that is done, the next part is validation and redaction of PII. So of course we have humans verifying these documents, but we cannot release any personally identifiable information to these people. So the software will automatically redact any PII and convert each transaction into an independent row that can be transcribed. The second part is data verification. So a bank statement is then broken up into, let's say, 500 numbers, images, and the transcribed entities. And these are independently sent in parallel to 500 verifiers to verify the output and bring it back. The next is final review and fraud detection. So final review and fraud detection does stuff like if you get the beginning balance on a bank statement and the end balance, and then you add up all of the transactions in the middle, it should balance out to 0. And the result is you get 99+% accurate data and analytics from bank statements, from pay stubs, from invoices, and from pretty much any scanned document. So what are the advantages of this process? You get to maintain a uniform data framework for risk. You make smarter decisions with accurate data. You streamline the process from days to hours. So if you upload your bank statements, you can get transcribed versions and automated credit decisions in 10 minutes or so. So we started as a document transcription company 5 years ago, primarily focusing on bank statements. From there, we expanded to pay stubs. But now what we do is we take the entire credit decisioning process. So what happens after you transcribe a bank statement or a pay stub or an invoice is that it then goes into a pretty complex cash flow algorithm that can understand whether this person is going to be able to pay back a loan or not. So step one, what we used to do is we used to extract and validate the bank statement information. Now what we do is we actually connect data sources to figure out whether these documents together work in tandem. So if you've got a pay stub that says you earn $1,000 a month, and you've got bank statements that show incoming salary, does it all match up, net of taxes and all of that stuff? We detect fraud. So bank statement original fraud detection was matching up, balancing out starting balances, ending balances, and the transactions in the middle. Now we can go a step further from that and look at documents to find the minutest difference in font, in alignment, in pixels, or any sign of digital fraud. It's called synthetic fraud detection. And the next is analyze. So we can take this data, analyze, and see, look, is this a person who earns $5,000 a month? What is typical? Does he spend 20% on rent? Does he spend 5% on car EMIs? What are the basics, and how does this specific case compare to others? There's also other kinds of analytics where you can say, hey, does this person have a gambling problem? If there's ATM withdrawals within, let's say, a mile of casinos on a regular basis, those things can be detected. So every ATM's got a little code that lets us know what the geolocation of the ATM is. So basis those withdrawals, you can uncover various habits, alcoholism, gambling, etc. So that's what we are in a nutshell now. We take inflow from customer websites in the form of pay stubs, bank statements, or any other documents they upload. We'll take that, we'll get the bank account data, we'll analyze it, we'll estimate income, we'll create a decision, and we can integrate directly into the LOS. High level, a little bit about us. So founding in 2014, headquartered in New York City. We've raised about $30 million in venture funding. We do about 5 million bank statements a month. We are currently very active in the US, so I would say 9 out of every 10 online lenders in the US uses our technology for credit decisioning. So that includes Lending Club, SoFi, Funding Circle, Blue Vine, and many, many more. We are just expanding into Europe and the Middle East. So if any of you is interested in leveraging this technology for your bank, then I'd be happy to talk. That's it for me. I'll leave it open for some questions. My email address is up there. So if any of you have any questions, you can feel free to reach out to me. Any questions? There is? Yeah.
I'm working in a financial institution. I'm actually handling the business where we see lots of documents. But maybe the case that you were demonstrating is straightforward cases. In actual scenarios, and most of the people here in UAE, they will have more than one bank account. They will have more than one credit card. It's very difficult to decide. It's not like one document that you need to scan. So how do we handle such cases where you have some of the customer, they have their salary account and they have another account where they transfer the money, and most of their transactions are done on another bank account. Here is only the salary is uploaded and then they transfer it. How do we handle such cases?
Okay, so thank you for that. It's a very good question. So I think that's exactly what we meant when we said we correlate the data. So it used to be 2 or 3 years ago where we were only a document transcription company where you would send the document and we transcribe it. But now you can do is you upload all of the bank statements. So the credit card statements, the bank statements, various bank statements, and the pay stubs, all of those get transcribed. They get unified into one cash flow statement for the individual. And then there's analysis, right? So if you get a bank statement and we see a credit card payment from that, that means the guy has a credit card. So then you upload the credit card statements and you can get the credit card transactions that led up to that credit card payment. And then you unify that into one cash flow statement for the customer for the analysis. Does that answer your question? Yeah, so if they use cash, then what's going to show up in the bank statement is a cash withdrawal. So we treat that as a expense. And if it's a monthly recurring expense over 6 months, then you treat that as a monthly recurring expense with little insight into where it was spent. Of course, where the cash was withdrawn from plays in, right? So, I mean, if it's continuously an ATM or a bank branch outside a casino or outside a liquor store, then you know there's a problem. Any other questions?
Any other question?
There's something. Yeah. Yeah, so yes and no. We have dealt with various languages. So English is obviously the primary language for transcription. But in the US, there's a lot of Spanish documents that come in. There's a lot of French documents that come in. We've also expanded. We've got some customers in the UK where specifically a bunch of other languages come in. So yes, in that case, that we can do languages. No, in the fact that we cannot do Arabic yet, or we haven't done Arabic yet. We don't foresee it to be a problem because fortunately, banks and financial statements have a fairly limited vocabulary. So it's quite easy for the algorithm and for the verifiers to acclimatize themselves with that smaller vocabulary and get on with it.
We take the last question for the session. Any other question? Yeah,
Oh, there we go. Yeah.
right there. So I would request all the audience members, the thing is we're recording and we would love for your voices to be heard.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah, so from what I've understood from your explanation is the model works, it transcribes the data, and then you also do complete analysis, credit analysis at your end as well.
Sure, yeah.
You also have that capability.
Mm-hmm.
Is this more for retail or individual clients, or also this can be used for corporate or SME clients as well? Because the analysis of data will be very different on the corporate side versus the retail. That's what I would have.
So actually SME is our bread and butter. So, I think for the longest time we only had online SME lenders. So we could do the balance sheets, we could do bank statements for businesses, invoices and everything that's needed. Consumer lending is actually something that's come later for us in the last year and a half. So in terms of SMEs, yes, lots. Instead of larger enterprises and larger loans, yes, we can do it, but I don't think that's where the big problem lies for automating that process, right? I mean, if you're getting $1 million loan, then saving money, time, and effort on the actual credit processing is probably not the goal.
How NISA compliant is satisfied?
How, sorry, again?
Information security.
So it's in AWS. We're both GDPR and SOC2 compliant. And before it actually even gets out there, the PII is anywhere redacted. So what actually goes out to anywhere outside of the secure region is completely anonymized data. So for instance, you'll have a bank statement, your name, your address, everything would be redacted. Only a specific transaction, sometimes not even a transaction, just a little box that actually has the number will actually be redacted and sent to a verifier and says, look, does this image look like 4023 or not?
So your data center is outside UAE, right?
It's in the AWS cloud. It can be moved to a cloud in the UAE. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
That's what we do for specific markets. So for instance, for India and the UK, we just move it to the AWS server inside that country.